I think I'm up and running.
And now leave meeting.
All right. All right. So we are skipping ahead. I talked to Renee today. Obviously, we did the 13th. We were looking at doing the 14th. I want to try to keep Reconstruction all together, but I think the 25th Amendment is going to be a big topic of conversation coming up here in the next couple of weeks. And I think what you're going to find is that you're going to be getting into conversations with people online, people at work, people that have never really read the 25th. They're just getting bits and pieces of it from, the guy who they live next door to, or, something they saw on the internet, and they don't really understand the 25th Amendment. So I figure we could go through the 25th, we'll read it, we'll get a basic understanding of the 25th, maybe a little more than basic, so that we can at least start getting into these conversations with people. And that way we're spreading good information. And if you find people that are getting the bad information, send them our way, right? We'll get them the good information. So we're running a little late here, so I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into the 25th Amendment. So we're going to talk about what it does and what it doesn't do. And the biggest thing that the 25th Amendment does not do, which is the biggest misconception out there, is that the 25th Amendment has no mechanism in it to remove the President of the United States. There is nothing in the 25th Amendment that will cause Joe Biden to lose his presidency. We have an order of succession. That act was passed in 1947 that will dictate what the correct order is. So it's not just, we're appointing whoever we want to appoint to the presidency, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the 25th Amendment really clears some things up, and especially as it pertains to the vice president. First off, what it says. So before we talk about what it says, we got to talk about why we're here. And why we're here is, if you remember back in Article 2, which sets up the executive branch in the Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 6 says, in case of the removal of the president from office or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of the said office, the same shall devolve on the vice president, and the Congress may by law provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability, both of the president and the vice president, declaring what officer shall then act as president, and such officer shall act accordingly until the disability be removed or a president shall be elected. So when they first came up with this, it sounded great, but if you really read it, I think you can see the problems with it, right? There's nothing in here in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 6 that gives the vice president the actual presidency. All it gives her, or him, in this case it would be her, are the duties of the office. That's it. It doesn't do anything to give her the presidency, even in death, according to this. In the case of even death, all it does is the powers devolve onto the vice president. So this had been talked about quite a bit. And when it really came to a head was on the assassination of Kennedy in '63. This was, the 25th Amendment was brought up before Congress on 1965, and it was ratified in 1967, just after the Kennedy assassination. So let's get into that. So there's 4 sections to the 25th Amendment. Section 1 is pretty clear, and all that does is, and all it says is, in case of the removal of the president from office or of his death or resignation, the vice president shall become president. And all that's doing right there is spelling out that the vice president is going to become the president. Once the president is removed, dead, or resigns, it can't go to anybody else. It can't be appointed to anybody. It is going to the vice president of the United States. So vice president's going to move up into the presidency. That's going to leave a hole for the vice presidency. And early on, before the vice presidency became what it is today, it was a really lesser position. It wasn't a big deal. And early on, one of the estimates I saw is that the vice presidency was only filled 20% of the time. Either they would move on to replace presidents who died, one resigned, some of the vice presidents died, and there was no mechanism in there to replace the vice president at all. So it would usually go unfilled. So section 2 is going to cover how that vacancy is filled. So whenever there is a vacancy in the office of the vice president, the president shall nominate a vice president who shall take office upon confirmation by a majority vote of both houses of Congress. So what this is saying is whenever there's a vacancy in the vice president's office, the president of the United States, who at this point will be the vice president, will get to nominate. So in this case, Harris would get to nominate who she wants to be vice president. It doesn't just automatically go to Nancy Pelosi, to the Speaker of the House. She is only outlined in the order of succession. So if the president, vice president get killed, if they die, they're both impeached, whatever, then Nancy Pelosi would become the president of the United States, at least acting until there's an election. But in this case, she does not just ascend into the vice presidency. That is going to be Harris's job to nominate somebody, and then it's got to be a majority vote from both houses of Congress in order for that person to become the president. Discussion? Questions?
For that person to be the vice
Do you,
president.
let's see. Do you think they're trying to push this before the next election?
Well, you know,
Because
I don't know.
if they lose the majority,
Are they trying to push what?
well,
The
the 25th.
Well, I don't know. And, you know, honestly, for this, I want to keep it on the 25th and I don't want to speculate on what may be happening or what their motives may be. I certainly want to
Okay.
speculate on that in the post discussion.
Gerald Ford was appointed, I believe, in this process after Nixon resigned, because Nixon's vice president was Sparrow Agnew, and he had resigned
We're
criminally
going to talk
before.
about that. Correct. Yeah. Spiro Agnew resigned 1973. Wanted nothing to do with the Nixon presidency.
Right. So they used this process to appoint Gerald Ford. And my understanding, I may be a little off, it's been a while since I researched it, was essentially, I think the Democrats had control at the time, and they kind of decided which member of Congress would jump up and be the vice president, because they basically said, we will only support this guy, and you guys won't get your majority without you guys saying it's him. So, you know, I think it would look bad on both parties if, you know, for example, that happened now, and, you know, the Republicans were like, we're not going to vote for anybody unless it's your person, or the Democrats appointed somebody that wouldn't get ascended or selected, because we want a vice president. So it would be more political suicide, and there's plenty of that going on. But that may be the one thing we could actually agree on in some capacity.
Fair. And I'll have to take your, I don't know. You probably researched that more than I did as far as Ford goes. Actually, I guarantee you researched that more than I did. Anything else? Anybody else got any discussion on that before we move on? All right. So both the vice president both the president and vice president are elected by the states. So it made sense, instead of having an election for the vice president, it just made sense to have Congress confirm the new vice president. If you remember, the people don't actually vote for president, right? That's why we have the Electoral College. The states are the ones that actually cast their votes for the president. So moving on to section 3, it gets a little interesting. Whenever the president transmit to the president pro tempore. Now, if you remember, the president pro tempore of the Senate, you guys remember who that is, or what that is, or why that name is there? Come on.
Is that in the case that they all get killed in like bombing or something?
No.
Vice president is
President
of
pro
the Senate.
tem.
That's the majority leader of the Senate.
So correct. It is a temporary president of the Senate, because who is the president of the Senate?
The vice
Vice
president.
president.
Vice president, correct. So if there is no vice president, that means the vice president has ascended into the presidency. There is nobody there, so they do assign president pro tempore, which I believe is the majority or the minority speaker, correct?
Right now it's the guy that led the impeachment proceedings. The second one, I can't remember his name. Democrat. It's a Democrat, so it's got to be. Maybe it is.
Majority.
It's got to be majority, right?
As a majority leader.
Majority, you're right, not minority. So anyway, it is the temporary president of the Senate. So whenever the president transmits to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits them a written declaration to the contrary, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the president or by the vice president as acting president. So, at that point now, the vice president is an acting president, and that's all it is. The two times this has happened is under Reagan and Bush. Both underwent anesthesia for surgical procedures and temporarily turned over their power to the vice president. So if, in the case of surgery, they're going to go under anesthesia, we can't have even an hour. We can't have a minute without a president. Back in the day, we used to be able to do that when it took, it would, if a state was being attacked, it would take weeks for word to get back that something was going on. But now with nuclear, in the nuclear age and the way things are going, information is flowing instantaneously. We can't be without a president for a minute. So anytime that they were to go under anesthesia, they would be rendered unable to discharge their duties. They notify them in writing, and the vice president would take over as acting president until the president comes back with another letter saying that he is certainly well within his power or well within his abilities to take back the presidency. So the only times that has been done, now remember, this is only since 1967, the 25th. So only times that's been done is with Reagan and with Bush, went off without a hitch. Questions on that? Because we're about to get into the meat of the 25th Amendment and how it would probably apply today. All right. So Section 4, this is the one. This is the one that everybody talks about. This is the one they were talking about with Trump. This is the one that everybody is talking about with Biden. So what Section 4 is going to cover is what if the president is unable or unwilling to declare he is unable to discharge his duties? And obviously, the example that we're going to bring up here would be dementia, but it's not always dementia, right? It could be, the president is out there snowblowing the driveway of the White House, falls, cracks his head, knocks himself loopy, has a concussion, knocks himself out, whatever the case may be, and he's unwilling to declare that he is unable to discharge his duties. But more importantly, for today, it is if we'll use dementia, right? Dementia starts kicking in. So now, for the sake of argument, just because Joe Biden is the president now, Joe Biden ends up with dementia. Joe Biden doesn't want to admit he has dementia, and he refuses, is unwilling to send that letter and say, look, I don't think I am capable of discharging my duties. So how Section 4 starts: whenever the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may by law provide, transmit to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office of acting as acting president. So whenever the vice president and a majority of the principal officers of the executive departments, which is what?
His cabinet.
Cabinet, right? So whenever the vice president and the majority of his cabinet come together and say, look, something is seriously wrong here. He's not making the right decisions. Clearly, he is not able to discharge his duties in the best interest of the United States. They can then go to the Senate and to the Speaker of the House with their written declaration, and the vice president will immediately assume the powers and duties of acting president of the United States. It's that easy. So if there's a coup and they decide they just want to get him out, how does he get his power back? All it takes is thereafter It continues on there, section 4. Thereafter, when the president transmits to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that no inability exists, he shall resume the powers and duties of his office. So once the president, vice president, and the cabinet sends a letter, says, hey, man, President Biden or whoever the president is at the time is completely unfit to do his job. The vice president will then become the acting president. Now, the president can immediately send a letter and say that, look, this is garbage. I absolutely have the ability to conduct the affairs of the president of the United States. That is how he gets it back. Now, what if he's still not fit? What if you have Joe, who's got dementia, Harris, the cabinet say, look, this isn't right. This is going horribly wrong. We need to get him out of there. He doesn't know what he's doing. Day by day, it's getting worse. Joe refuses. They send the letter. Joe immediately responds with, look, these guys are crazy. They just want the presidency. I'm not stepping down. I'm fine. Everything's fine. We're fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. So he does that. And we're going to continue on here that he shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless the vice president and majority of either the principal officers of the executive department or of such other body as Congress may by law provide, and remember that because we're going to talk about that soon, transmit within 4 days to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is in fact unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. So they get him out. He says, nope, I'm not going. Here's my letter. I'm back. I'm back, baby. I'm going to take care of business. They have 4 days now. 4 days to get a letter back there and say, look, we disagree. He is absolutely unfit for duty. He cannot lead this country. At that point, then, Congress will step in. Section 4 continues that once the vice president and the cabinet members say that he is in fact unfit, thereupon Congress shall decide the issue, assembling within 48 hours for that purpose, if not in session. If the Congress, within 21 days after receipt of the latter written declaration, or if Congress is not in session within 21 days after Congress is required to assemble, determines by 2/3 votes of both houses that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office, the vice president shall continue to discharge the same as acting president. Otherwise, the president shall resume the powers and duties of his office. So Congress at that point has 3 weeks, 3 weeks to hash it out. And if they can determine by 2/3 votes of both the House and the Senate that the president is still unable to discharge his duties and powers, then the vice president is going to continue as acting president indefinitely until such time that the president can resume powers and duties of his office. Now, my guess is that if he decides that he wants to, and I don't know this for sure, but my guess is if he decides a little later on that he's okay and he sends another letter there, then it's probably going to just repeat itself. It's going to go back to Congress and they're going to make that determination again, whether or not he can get back in there. So the problem with the 25th Amendment is that there is no mechanism to keep him out. Now, in a perfect world, he's going to have advisors. He's going to realize something is wrong and the president is going to be talked into stepping down. But do you think you're talking Donald Trump into stepping down? Right? Do you think anybody, if Donald Trump got dementia, do you think anybody could talk Donald Trump into stepping down? I mean, I don't think there's any chance of that at all. And that is where the 25th Amendment still has a little ways to go. It does a lot to clean up Section 2 or Article 2, Section 1, but there is no mechanism in here to remove the president. He is still going to remain the president throughout this entire thing until the election, if he wants to keep fighting it. Discussion on this before we move on, because we did have a little something going on that would have fixed this.
Well, I think if it came to the point where it was going circular, like we're talking about, there's a likelihood that the president would have committed an impeachable offense somewhere down the line. So if we can't rid him with the 25th, then at that point we could turn to
Well,
impeachment.
and that's one of the things that we were talking about on one of my lives, maybe last night, is you got a lot of people that think there have already been impeachable offenses with Biden, and I'm one of those. I do. The way that Afghanistan was handled was, once the investigation into this thing, if it is a true investigation, I think there is going to be plenty there to at least warrant the impeachment investigation, to launch an impeachment and launch impeachment proceedings. Some people say no. Some people say there's no high crimes and misdemeanors.
Well, I'm just speaking in hypotheticals, Jim.
No, I get it.
For the sake of the session.
I
Yeah.
get it. So a lot of people are coming back on the 25th now saying that the 25th is going to be the way to get him out. But as you can see, the 25th is no mechanism to get the president out. All the 25th is a mechanism to do is to basically neuter the president so that he can cause no more damage and give the vice president those duties and have her act as an acting president of the United States. So when people are talking about the way to get him out is the 25th, that's where you got to come in and correct him and be like, look, no mechanism in the 25th to get him out. Go read it. You know, I mean, it's, and I don't know for sure, right? I like I always say, this isn't a class. All I do is read a little more than most people and lead the discussion. I don't know, but it seems to me that this could go into, like you said, circular arguments that, you know, if he absolutely refuses to step down, that we keep going back and repeating. And the vice president is an acting president, but she's still a vice president. So that office is never filled. The president's there. He's just lame. He's not doing anything. So
Can you recall a president?
can I what?
Can
No. You know what? I looked into that. There's no mechanism to recall a president. You know, not like the states. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives anybody that once he's in, he's in.
Yeah.
The only way to recall a president is impeachment. I mean, that's it. So, yeah, I mean, it's not like we can have another vote and we can vote him out. So, yeah, I mean, the 25th is great. I mean, it does a lot. It does a lot for us. You know, it certainly clears up the vice president's role in a lot of this stuff so that we're not just winging it. You know, before this, the Congress could appoint anybody from the cabinet they wanted. You know, they could pick, you know, their buddy who was HUD secretary and put him in there. But now the 25th is at least outlined the vice president's role throughout this entire thing.
Hey, Jim.
Yep.
Back in October of 2020, Pelosi had a thing about this. They were trying to propose a bill.
Tell you
that was
what, why don't
sponsored by
we
James
just give me a second? So let's talk about House Resolution 1987, which I think is where you're going, Dan.
Yeah.
That was actually brought up in 2017, and it died. It died at the expiration of that Congress. But the problem with HR 1987 is that it got politicized immediately. Everybody assumed that they were trying to do this to get Donald Trump out because they thought Donald Trump was crazy. When in reality, if you go back and you look, most of the Democrats, a majority of the Democrats did not want to use this for Donald Trump. They knew that no good would come from that. And what HR 1987, now you can go and read it. I don't have all the wording here. It's the Oversight Commission on Presidential Capacity Act. Now, I don't have all the wording here because it did not pass. But basically, in a nutshell, what this was going to do, and this is where we are back to where Congress can, you know, by law, assign a commission instead of the cabinet members doing this. So what they wanted to do, it was going to be a true
It's called
bipartisan
commission.
Yeah, the Oversight Commission on Presidential Capacity Act. Are you guys seeing my stuff? It's on, right?
Yes.
Right,
Mhm.
okay. Yeah, so it's the Oversight Commission on the Presidential Capacity Act, and basically what it was going to be a true bipartisan effort. It was going to have, we were going to get to pick Republicans, they were going to get to pick their Democrats. So it's not like, it's not like these commissions where Nancy Pelosi's getting to pick the Republicans that she wants on there. The Republicans were going to pick the Republicans, the Democrats were going to pick the Democrats. There were going to be medical professionals on there. And they were going to have the final say in the final say in what happened with the president in the case that he refuses to step down, and it was going to clean up the 25th Amendment. So this would have created a commission to carry out the 25th Amendment. So what was the problem? So the biggest problem in this, at least that I saw, the biggest problem was that we politicized it. Republicans assumed that the Democrats were only doing it because they wanted to get rid of Donald Trump, when in fact, I'm not so convinced that they weren't getting ready for a Joe Biden presidency, to be honest with you. That they knew there were problems. Everybody knew there were problems. And I am not convinced that they were not doing this as a preemptive measure for what was coming. But the biggest problem that I have with it is, look, if you truly believe in the Constitution cannot apply and not apply based on who's in office, right? You can't allow the Constitution to not apply to Democrats because you are a conservative. And the problem with this was Section 3, subsection A duty of commission in general, if directed by Congress pursuant to Section 5, the commission shall carry out a medical examination of the president to determine whether the president is mentally or physically unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office as described under Section B. The problem with this is that the government is now going to order that the president of the United States undergo medical testing, either for mental or physical problems. And the Fourth Amendment prohibits the government from illegal search and seizure. And you would not allow the government to come in and order you to go through mental testing. And I understand he's the president, but he still has constitutional rights. And this was the big hang up with this thing. He still has his constitutional rights. He does not give up those constitutional rights only because he is president of the United States. Now, there were some Fifth Amendment issues too, I guess, that were brought up. But if you remember, the Fifth Amendment really it's only criminal issues. It covers criminal. It doesn't cover civil. It doesn't. So I'm not sure I understand where the Fifth Amendment argument came from. I am 100% on board with the Fourth Amendment argument, that you just can't order him to go through testing. The consideration, I think it's Section 6. Part B is any refusal by the president to undergo such examination shall be taken into consideration by the commission in reaching a conclusion in the report under subsection A. So show me where else that you exercising your rights, nowhere in court, I can tell you that you just simply exercising your rights can be used against you. And that's exactly what this would have been. The president exercising his rights, saying, hey, look, you know what, if you want a medical examination, if you want a mental examination done of me, then get a warrant, right? Get a warrant outlining exactly what it is you're after. Get a warrant that outlines, that I am the person to be seized and what results you're looking for. And then maybe you got something, but the government can't just order him to go through that.
Well, I mean, that is like saying if you invoke the Fifth, that you can be considered guilty, right?
Correct.
That's exactly what that's saying.
Right. So you have the right to remain silent. But if you choose to remain silent, we're going to assume you're trying to hide something. That's not the way it works. It's not the way it works. So, I mean, if you can prove that the president of the United States is been mentally incapacitated, all right, we got something there. But he is not required to give evidence and testimony against himself. And I think that was the Fifth Amendment argument. But again, I think the Fifth Amendment, and you know what, we're running a Constitution course here. I don't have my pocket Constitution up. No.
Oh,
So I think the Fifth
From us
Amendment, what's
that
that?
require mental testing, like, if you're going into law enforcement, you have to have these tests. And if you have some kind of like, officer involved shooting, sometimes you have to retake these tests before they let you come
Sure.
back on the force. So how come they can require those and not just in the beginning of applying for the job, but during the job, they can reinstate, you have to take
But
these
but
tests
that's all
again?
voluntary stuff, right? When I got hired, I knew that was part of it. I agreed to it. I agreed to go through mental evaluations. But there's no provision in there right now for that. And there's no provision that once you're in there, that you can make him do it. Now, this would have been easily fixed. And had this been fixed, I think this really would have cleaned up the 25th Amendment. And it would have provided a mechanism in there for us to be able to get him out, or her, whoever the case may be, when mentally they're unable to discharge the duties of the presidency. But like everything else now, it was just all political, and the Republicans weren't going to vote for it. And it died with Congress. So
I think too that when you're an elected official, you're not exactly under any type of an employment, regulation as you are as a cop.
right. Well, agreed. And I think that's it, right? I mean, he's still a citizen. He's a citizen serving he didn't apply for a job. He got elected to the job. I think you're right. I mean, that's where I would draw the line. When I know going into being a cop that I have to take a mental evaluation. I know that if I get in a shooting, I'm going to have to be drug tested. I know that I'm going to have to go and talk to somebody before I can come back to work. I know all these things before I take the job. If I decide I don't want to take the job, then I can say, okay, this isn't for me.
So-
I don't want anybody to know I'm crazy. I'm just not going to take this job.
So could they have included in this act, in the proposal, that this would take place starting at the 2024 election or the 2028 election, sometime in the future? So it's not like it's weaponized against the sitting president. It's something in the future. So if you're going to run for president, this is what you're going in for. Then you know ahead of time. And if you don't want to get in mental evaluation during your presidency, don't run for president.
I don't know, I guess, right? I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with it then. If you knew going into it that this is the way it was going to work, but there's another easy fix, right? I mean, we have a way to fix the Constitution. It's just whether or not we can all get along enough to have an Article 5 convention on it. We could certainly fix the 25th Amendment. But I think that the president refusing to leave is pretty fringe stuff. I just don't see that happening. I mean, maybe with Donald Trump, to be honest with you, I could see Donald Trump doing it. But for the most part, I just don't see it happening. Even if Joe didn't want to step down, I mean, the party would get with him, his family would get with him. I think Joe would step down.
I feel like this is one of those situations, especially with somebody like this, where you would almost, the thing I could see happening is if it ever were to get invoked, that Joe Biden says, well, wait, like I want to, like, let me go get tested. Like if he doesn't want to drop out, like he can submit himself.
Okay, and the 25th has mechanisms in there for that, right?
Right.
I mean, he
That's
can.
the way I would see it going.
What's that?
That's how I would see it going if it happened.
Yeah, but I think that's perfect, because there's mechanisms in the 25th for that, where they say, hey, look, you are not capable of doing this. And then he could go and he could prove that he's capable and come back with his letter and say, look, I got tested. Here's my doctor's stuff. Now they could always say, nah, we don't trust that doctor. And we're right back in the same boat. But yeah, I mean, there's mechanisms in there for him to do that.
I am not crazy. Dr. Jill said so.
Yeah. Dr. J. Dr. Jill said, I am not nuts. Doctor, I'm not sure what. Oh, stop, we're getting off. So, I mean, the whole purpose of doing the 25th tonight, it's not perfect. It's not perfect, but I just hear so much that people are going to get him removed using the 25th Amendment, and it's totally wrong. That's not at all what the 25th Amendment is. All it's basically doing is establishing what the vice president's role is going to be.
No, but I do think it starts the conversation and gets the conversation moving in the right direction if there is a change needed. Do you know what I mean?
No, for sure, for sure. I mean, nobody's ever.
So it is
they haven't never.
important.
They've never invoked the 25th on anybody. I mean, if they actually did invoke the 25th Amendment on somebody, I think it's a pretty big deal. And the fact that now Congress has to get involved, and you're talking 2/3 of each house. That's there to protect the Donald Trump scenario, right? That the Democrats just hate Donald Trump so much that they're just going to force him out against the will of the people. And
but doesn't his cabinet have to?
Well,
his
right.
cabinet has to.
Right,
The
but
majority of his cabinet has to say it.
But look at his cabinet. But look at his cabinet turnover.
Yeah.
I mean, look at his cabinet turnover, right? I just feel like there were very few people that were true to Donald Trump. There was a whole lot of Republicans that didn't like Donald Trump. So, but no, you're right. I mean,
it doesn't say just his cabinet. It says Congress can put together their little commission instead of the cabinet.
Correct. And that is what the Commission on the Presidential Capacity Act was going to do. That was going to establish the commission. It was going to establish, I think it was 11 people. I would have to go back and read it, or if somebody pulls it up, actually, Renee, if you could pull it up and just read it real quick, or somebody.
But it didn't pass, so it's all moot, right? Like none of that.
It didn't pass. It's all moot, right? But it could certainly resurface, right? Maybe if we fix the Fourth Amendment issues in it, it was actually a good law. But I think it was 11 people, and I probably should have printed it out. It's an interesting read to see.
It is. It does sound interesting. I get concerned anytime 11 people could get together and change things so drastically. Obviously these are qualified medical doctors and stuff like that, but the Supreme Court is filled with qualified lawyers, and somehow they look at the Constitution sometimes and get it so wrong. So that's kind of where my big red flag is. You just never really know. Put somebody on the commission that you think is going to lead to the outcome.
Actually, you know what? I've got it right here. Let me read it to you real quick. So the membership, section 4 of that, number and appointment. The commission shall be composed of 11 members appointed as follows. 1, 2 members appointed by the majority leader of the Senate. 2 members appointed by the minority leader of the Senate. 3, 2 members appointed by the Speaker of the House of Representatives. 4, 2 members appointed by the minority leader of the House of Representatives. 5, 2 members, one of whom is appointed jointly by the 2 appointing individuals under paragraphs 1 through 4 who are members of or caucus with the Democratic Party. B, one of whom is appointed jointly by the 2 appointing individuals under paragraph 1 through 4 who are members of caucus with the Republican Party, and each of whom has served as president, vice president, secretary of state, attorney general, secretary of the Treasury, secretary of defense, or surgeon general. Number 6, 1 member to serve as chair of the commission appointed by simple majority vote of the 10 members appointed under paragraphs 1 through 5. So it doesn't get more bipartisan than that. And they were bringing in people, at least 2 that had executive experience. Each member appointed to the commission under paragraphs 1 through 4 of subsection A shall be a physician. Subsection A, 1 through 4. Let's see. Each member appointed to the commission under paragraphs 1 through 4 of subsection A shall be a physician. One of the two members appointed by each individual under such paragraphs, one shall be a physician with a specialty in psychiatry. The chair shall be either a physician or an individual appointed under paragraph 5 or subsection A or both. Now, the problem with that too, I mean, can you guys see the problem with that when you are bringing doctors into this to sit on this board? I mean, you're bringing in a psychiatrist here, and you're gonna ask the psychiatrist to decide whether or not somebody's crazy or not without even possibly doing any kind of evaluation on them. So, I mean, there were problems with it.
Yeah,
Well, that's illegal in itself. I think they lose their license if you diagnose somebody without examining.
Well, I don't think they're going to diagnose.
Won't diagnose, give a vote. Either way, it's weird, especially, I mean, just little things, examples. The APA is a very left-leaning organization, extremely liberal. And then you get a commission together and you say, hey, I mean, just for example, like Mitt Romney is going to go onto this thing, and so is John McCain before he passed, back when Trump was in office. And then boom, now you have, two people that don't like Trump plus a physician potentially that's left-leaning, and all of a sudden you've already tipped the scale.
Right.
There was other qualifications. Maybe those two wouldn't make it, but then you throw George Bush in there, Dick Cheney. I don't know. It's easy to tip the scale when it's such a small number.
Well, it is, but you're looking at the majority leader of the Senate and the minority leader of the Senate. I mean, the Republicans aren't. So you're basically talking about a coup, right? I mean, where everybody is just going to stack it against whoever the president may be.
Well, I'm not convinced that McConnell was on Trump's side, so I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, and that's the kind of stuff, you get a couple guys that just don't like the current sitting president, and it's dangerous. That's all.
Sure, it is. And just for the heck of it, there's limitations on this. So a member appointed under subsection A may not, at the time the member is appointed, or serving as a member on the commission, be an elected official to any federal, state, or local office. An employee, as that term is defined in the United States Code, including any employee of the United States Postal Service or the Postal Regulatory Commission, which is weird. Or C, a member of the armed forces, including reserve components thereof. So no postal carriers, no soldiers, and no elected officials. So, I mean, and it didn't get through. It did not get through. It had a little bit of work to do, but I think that I think it would have gone a long way to at least have that already done, to how this commission was going to be formed. And, when we start getting into these circular arguments, and Congress can pass the buck onto the commission. It says here that supporters say, and this is off GovTrack, supporters point to numerous examples of what they claim and see, and this is it right here. So it was so political when this thing came out. Supporters point to numerous examples of what they claim is Trump's inability to discharge the powers of his office, from revealing classified intelligence information given from ally Israel to Russia, to insulting late night or early morning tweets. In case of emergency break glass, House lead sponsor Jamie Raskin told Yahoo News, if you look at the record of things that have happened since January, it is truly bizarre litany of events and outbursts. I assume every human being is allowed one or two errant or seemingly deranged tweets. The question is whether you have a sustained pattern of behavior indicates something is seriously wrong. Now, even though Jamie Raskin was saying this, there were a lot of Democrats that came out and said, look, we're not using this against Trump. We're not going to remove a sitting president, because you don't like the way he's tweeting, or, you're going to need a whole lot more proof before we remove a sitting president of the United States.
No, I mean, I believe that if you want to have some mechanism that works with the 25th, then you amend the Constitution on the front end that people have to submit to certain conditions when they run, or agree to certain conditions when they run for president. That's the only way you can get around that without it being so partisan.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Why wouldn't that work? Does anybody know why that wouldn't work? I mean, my guess is you can't just, it would have to be constitutional though, right? I mean, we would
Well,
have
yeah,
to.
that's what I said. Amend the Constitution, just like you have to be a certain age before you can run for
Right,
president.
right.
You have to be a
Yeah.
citizen of the United States to run. So that would be another condition.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't see why not. I mean, you already have to be 35 years old, so why don't you have to, that you have to get a mental evaluation. Mental evaluation prior to being elected and sometime in year 2. You're going to have to do it. And if you want to run, then you run. And if you don't. I agree with that. It seems like that would probably be the easiest way. But I think we're talking about worst case scenarios too. I still think that if it came down to this and the vice president will assume the duties, I think the president steps down. And, if we're talking, mental faculties, I mean, obviously if the president falls, like I said, and cracks his head, and once he's cleared to come back, then he comes back. But I think when we're talking, I would like to think that Joe just steps down, which was probably the plan all along. And well, I'll just leave it at that. We could talk about that.
Save it.
So anything else on the 25th? What's that?
I said save it for
What's
the
that?
post.
Yeah, right. I'm gonna get rolling here. I'm in such a bad mood. So anything else on the 25th? Does everybody understand the 25th? Do you think you understand it enough to at least engage people in conversations on it now? And to stop people from this garbage that we're gonna remove the president using the 25th? I mean, at least you have a foundation on the 25th. You're probably already ahead of 70% of the population out there who's never read it, but think they know what it says.
Yeah, that's some good information. I think my mind with kind of how my thought about what's happening hasn't really changed, but I definitely good information and good conversation to kind of put some more context to it for sure.
Right
Yeah,
on. Tim got in.
I think one of the things with this present situation, not to get political, would be if they did invoke it, instead of him saying, no, I'm not leaving, they would use that as, okay, they don't want me here or they don't think I'm capable, I'm going to step down. So it's kind of like forcing his compliance in a way.
Yeah, I mean, short of Trump, I still hold to that. I don't think Trump leaves. Short of Trump, I don't see a president that's not going to step down at that point. I mean, Donald Trump's probably just going to fire his cabinet and then he's going to stay. I don't know.
I think as Jeff described it, it's very much like the British have a vote of no confidence.
Right.
And when you have no confidence, when everybody thinks you can't do the job anymore, you can't argue with those people, right? They have decided you are not going to be able to do the job. You kind of slink away, step down, and goodbye.
And I'll tell you, man, I don't know. There's just so much happening today. I see it coming. There's does anybody really think that this president is going to make it 4 years, right? They're going to try to prop him up for at least another year. Party wise, they're going to prop him up for another year. And if you remember why, is because if he goes this year, that's going to limit Harris to only running for one term. So just party wise, they want her to get in during the second year. You can't be president more than 8 years, with the exception of if you take over the presidency for a president who, for whatever reason, has left, then you can do 10. But you can't do more than 10, period. So if she goes in there right now, she's going to have 11 years, and so she's only going to be able to run for one term. So they can prop them up if they can weaken it. Bernie's this guy for another year, and then get him to that second year mark. Then she's home free. If she wants it.
Thoughts about as acting president, right? If he went away, I mean, heaven forbid a president. Let's not talk about our current president because of my job. But for example, a president got cancer and had to go for treatment for 90 days for 6 months and they stepped away to get cancer treatment. Well, while the vice president is in an acting role because the president is focused on his medical treatment, well, when that president comes back, does any of that time count that the vice president was serving?
I don't think so, because she's still a vice president
I
the
don't
whole
think so
time.
either. And that's kind of going into that 10-year thing you were talking about. I combine those two. Maybe there's a workaround if that was in fact a plan.
Oh, I got you. So he goes to get help for whatever the situation may be for a year, for 2 years. Meanwhile, she's calling all the shots. Doesn't count towards her time. And then boom, then she's in. Is that what you mean?
Essentially, in
Yeah.
another administration, not this
In
one.
another administration, not the current administration. Correct. I got you. No, it's interesting.
I think, we're pushing to get a convention of states, and I know that one of the priorities was term limits, which I think is very important, but given what we're experiencing now, this issue may even take precedence over that. in
No,
my
I
mind.
wouldn't think that we need a convention of states for this. I would like to think.
Well, no, but if you have to have an amendment to the Constitution, you have to have a convention of states.
No, Congress can do it.
You think?
Sure they can.
They won't.
Well, whether they
Not
will or
this
they
Congress.
won't, whether they will or they won't, they can. And I would like to think that something like this, they could come together and say, look, we all agree, right? Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. Like you said, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. You're going to have a mental evaluation before you are elected. And then you're going to have one in year 2.
You know, it's crazy. The public doesn't even really know much about the Convention of the States either. We're at the fair over the weekend, and I was handing out Convention of the States pamphlets, and I'd say 20% of the people I was talking to even knew anything about the Convention of the States. It's crazy.
Yeah.
People
No,
think
and that's the problem.
I'm impressed it was that
There's
high.
not a whole lot of people that know a lot about the Fifth Amendment.
Well, that's just it. That's what I say. You guys are probably, I mean, you're already ahead of 70%, probably 80% of the people
I had
out
a
there
conversation with people last night about the Fifth Amendment.
about the 5th.
Yeah,
Article-
because they had no idea what it was.
Article 5.
Article 5.
I'm sorry. Sorry,
Oh,
yeah. So,
Article
not
5, yeah.
Fifth Amendment, Article 5. Yeah, my bad. Sorry.
I say the same thing. All right, I got you. No, right. I mean, well, and it's because people don't read the Constitution. They just don't. I mean, that's why we're here. That's why we're here. So you guys can take what we're talking about here and hopefully get out there and start, educating your friends and your family and whoever else wants to talk about it. I try to educate everybody on every news media post I see. Usually it's through memes. Never mind, we'll talk about this.
If we
talk-
did get a convention of states going and they knew we were really close to getting one, let's say on term limits, then they would jump ahead and jump in front of the train and get their term limits done. So we wouldn't get in the habit of doing conventions of states to go around them. You know what I mean?
Maybe. I don't know, man. I just don't ever see Congress voting themselves out of a job.
I could see him doing it though, just the way he said. You're right on the verge of getting the convention together.
Just to
and
stop it.
Congress said, Yep, just to stop. it.
So we don't make it a habit of getting what we
Who
want
knows what else you might put on that convention of states itinerary.
or what's
Right.
next. Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, if nobody else has anything on the 25th, I think we can call it a night, go to the post. And we can all, oh boy, this post. Although I've gotten a lot of it out of me. In the last couple nights, so we might be all right.
It's
Yeah,
almost
but
like
some
going
of
to
us.
the
have
bar.
The rest
not,
of us
so it should be
haven't,
a
though.
fiery post.
I know. All right. All right.
Okay.
Nobody else has anything, then we'll pick up in 2 weeks with the 14th, unless something else happens where we need to skip ahead. Renee, don't let me forget this because I know I'll forget.
Are we
And,
going to go back to the earlier time period now after Labor
we'll
Day?
talk about that because I know me and Mike are going to have a hard problem doing 8:00 with volleyball. Volleyball is on Tuesdays and the games are varsity is not going to get out of there much before 7:30.
Mm.
If we can get out of there by 7:30.
Right, right. If you only go two
Matches have been
games.
starting between 6:30 and 7, so
So, just to make it easier on me, I may put it off until volleyball season, then we'll go back to 8. I don't know if I'd have time to get back here. I'll be going live from the gym. Trying to do my stuff while I'm cheering for the girls. So yeah,
maybe we can get you the microphone in the gym.
for the time, I'll get Dan May to do it. So for the time being, we're going to stick with 9 o'clock. But we'll get
Every
back
other week.
every other week, but we'll get back to 8 o'clock for sure. We'll get back to 8 o'clock every week once the weather calms down and once fall sports calm down.
Okay,
So, cool. All right. I'll see you guys in the post. Give me a
good job.
All right. Thanks. Appreciate it.
I'll post the link.
All right.